This is a story about legacy, about passing along something, particularly a rock collection of my dad's that he collected all his life. Here's how it happens. We're going to build a display cabinet that's going to be a tall hall console. And it's going to be about 6 inches deep, 70 inches long, 14 inches wide. And we're going to build it out of this oak lumber. So I've got a couple of 3/4 inch pieces that are rough cut, about 9 feet long, and I've got a 1.5 by 3 3/4 boards, 1 9 and 1 7 inches. This board is, while it's 9 feet, I can use 70 inches up to about here, and then from down here, it's got a split in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this thing here for my 70-inch piece down there, and I'm going to take this piece, clamp and glue it before I mill it, and then I'll have a nice piece to work with. This one is 6 inches wide because that was a little longer. This one was just a hair under. So this one was about 5.5, and I did want this to be a total of 6, so we're making box joints. So I cut that one to 6 and used the offcut and glued on about 1.25 inches here. Now we're going to come back, flatten this board, and then we'll cut it to size as well. So I take the board over to the joiner, get a nice edge on it, nice straight and flat, then take it over to the planer, get it milled to width, and then I'm ready to use it. All right, here's what I discovered. This board, I put it through the joiner, got one face, I put it through the planer. Appeared that one face was dry, was flat. See this little bit of a rock in here? So this thing is rocking back and forth, and that's not acceptable. I couldn't figure out what was going on, but if you look real close in here, let me show you. If you look real close, when I push these edges down, you'll see these cracks appear right here and right there that are unacceptable. And that's what's causing this board to wobble. So these things are pushing down when I plane it, and they're popping back up so you don't see them. So this board is not going to be used. I have another piece that I'll use. Alternative solution would be to cut this right down here where these cracks are and then glue it back together. That certainly would work, but I'm gonna go the easier route. So this is my box joint jig. I've got it set up, but basically I'm taking these end pieces and I'm gonna cut 3 grooves in here for the joining pieces to mate in this fashion. First thing we're gonna do is cut this end. We're gonna flip it 180 degrees and cut the end down here. I've turned down the volume to spare your ears because the router is quite loud. Okay, so now we got this cut here. Had a little minor tear out here. I went a little fast. So now we're going to flip this over and cut the other end. So I have my end pieces cut for my sides of my cabinet. Now I have to cut the front pieces. Since these things are 70 inches long, trying to mount them on this is not going to work. So instead of taking my piece to my jig, I'm going to have to take my jig to my piece. So I'm going to clamp this guy on here like this, and then I'll come in here and cut these. Figuring out how to mount the jig on the piece was something like a 3-ring circus, but I figured it out. The key to making this cut on this jig mounted on this fashion was to keep the router as straight as possible to make sure your cut was perpendicular to the board. Here's another angle. You can see the mess this makes, but it was fun making the cut. No matter how good you cut your dados, there's always just a hair of cleanup to be able to make sure they're exactly flush. One little corner doesn't quite get cut right, square enough. and just needs a little tiny trim like that piece. Okay, and we have a box. Yeah. So I now need to cut a mortise in here because I'm going to have a tenon through here, through the pieces, that'll help hold this display cabinet at the right width. So I'm building a jig for the router to be able to cut this 2 1/4 inch mortise in the center of this board. So I've got these 2 pieces that are 6 inches wide. I got a 3/4 inch spacer in here, and I'm going to glue these guys in here like this. So get out a little CA glue and dab that on the 2 pieces. Then I spray the accelerator on the matching piece and just press them together. So this piece will come out after these dry in there. So now we're going to basically... So this jig is being made to fit a 3/4 inch guide bushing on the base of the router. So it'll slide in the slot, cutting a 1/2 inch mortise in the piece. And we have a 2 1/4 inch by 3/4 inch hole in the board, and our bearing will cut a 1/2 inch. Because I'm going approximately 1.5 inches to 3/4 through both these oak boards at one time, I'm doing it in small increments of 1/4 inch or so, and then I clean out the hole and then reroute again until I get the whole thing completed. So I have this tenon cut to fit this mortise here, and I just took it out so it fits in there. So now I have to cut this other end, but what I hand planed this down to get it to the right width so it would fit in here. So now I'm going to just take this over to my joiner and make that the same thickness all the way down, so I don't have to do this to match the other side. Alright, so I'm not going to pound it in anymore since I know they fit. So this is where the dado is going to be cut. So I marked this so you can see how this piece will have a 1/2 inch dado all the way through here, and it's going to cut and come out on the edge of this tongue or this finger joint, and we'll put an end piece, a little blocks to cover that. So we'll cut it all the way across off the 2 ends, and on the front side you won't see it at all because it'll be inside on the cut, not coming through the end piece. So I'm marking and measuring the board to make sure I get the width of the dado cut just right. So now we've made 2 cuts on each piece and have our plywood be able to fit within there. So it looks like it will, so now all I gotta do is hog out the middle and we'll have our dado all done. Here's my end piece. Here's my 1/2 inch plywood. And it looks like you have plenty of looseness in here, but in reality, when you get the full panel of plywood in there, because over this length, it does have a little bit of bow to it. You actually need that just a little bit of space so it'll fit just nice. All right, so we cut our plywood cut to size. So what we're going to do is take off the end and see how it fits. And it is. So here's a couple shots of the mineral cabinet at the dry fit just prior to glue up. We're ready to go. As the carcass dries, but since we just did a glue up on it, now we're on to cutting the trim pieces that will fit on the edge for our frame. We're going to have 3 frame panels, and they're going to be 1.5 inches wide. It'll be 3/4 of an inch thick, and then we have a 1/4 inch offset and a 1/2 inch depth. So here I am finishing up the glue up. So I have a few little spots in here, small little gaps in these box joints, and I'm going to glue this plug into the corner here, and then make sure I'm going to get all this nice. And I'm using hide glue at this point because it'll take stain, and we're going to stain this cabinet so it'll be all consistent color. So these are the little plugs that I cut to fit in where I cut the dados in the bottom of this. So to get this bevel on all 4 sides of this, I take this off. Now I'm building 3 frames that fit on the top of the cabinet. There's nothing fancy about the frames. They're just a butt joint with Dowe joinery to join them all with a rabbet around the inside of the frame. Now, cutting the rabbets on the inside of the frame is one of the messiest tasks, but it sure is rewarding when you get finished. Just have your vacuum handy. Because squaring the corner of the rounded rabbet is such a special task, I made a complete video. I'll give you a link below. So here's my cabinet, and here's the doors. We open it like this, hinges back here. Because this is going to be in a hallway, I don't want to have a handle or a knob or anything up there. So we're going to figure out how can you lift this easily. So I've come up with a solution. I'm going to carve into here a depression for a finger hold or a little knuckle hold to be able, you can reach in here and just get right underneath here to lift up that edge. So the question is, how are we going to do that? And the answer is, we start with our rabbet bit, we make 1 cut. Okay, so here's what our rabbet bit looks like after we made 1 little cut in here. Perfect cut right on our mark here. Now comes the part of woodworking when you need to do something by hand. So you have to rasp out and grind down the wood to be able to get a smooth transition from the rough edge to the smoothness of the finger grip. So here's what it looks like in progress. Here's closer to the finished work. And we get the little sanding to the final stage. This is the color my son picked out for this mineral cabinet. Since it's going in his house, I let him tell me what color was his preference. After a couple coats of finish on it, it has a nice sheen and polish of a very dark gray. Alright, to get my hinges on, I decided to use these exterior hinges. So I've taped them on here and I punched little holes in here with the drill bit. Now I'm going to use my drill to pilot holes and then put the screws. Finally, you get to the happy day of delivering the project. And here we are, unloading the mineral cabinet. So I hope you enjoyed our build of our mineral cabinet. It's in its final home. So if you liked our video on building this mineral cabinet, be sure to give us a thumbs up. If you want to see more of our videos and builds, consider subscribing down below. And as usual, come back and see me real soon.